Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Office Hours. Happy Friday. I am Kristen Gastaldo. I have been with Alfresco for about 2 years. I'm your community manager. So I work with marketing and products and to maintain our developer community and work on developer events. I work closely with our developer evangelist too. So we today are joined by Richard Esplin. Richard, do you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm product manager. I work with our content repository and our digital business platform services. And it's great to be on Office Hours. I feel like it's been a bit long since I've been able to join. I should say Francesco's enjoying his new little guy, so he's got a good excuse. He's got people that are even more fun than us to hang out with.
Yep, Francesco is about a 2-week-old baby right now, so he's probably about as preoccupied as you can get. But congratulations to him. Richard, for those of you who haven't been watching Office Hours for the last 6 years or so, Richard used to, I guess you were the community manager at that point when he hosted Office Hours and Tech Talk Lives for years and years. So he's a familiar face around here. I do have a couple of announcements to make before we get started. Let me share my screen because I put together a couple slides. I did not do the full catch up in the community. I need Francesco for that. So hopefully we'll have that next time we do Office Hours. Let me get a full screen going here. You gonna do it? Gonna happen? There we go. Okay, you guys can see my screen. It's already skipped a page. So for those of you that haven't seen me in the community as much as I normally am, it is because I am editing videos every day. So we have a lot of the content from DevCon back. People are putting up their slides in SlideShare, and then I'm putting up all the videos in YouTube. If you check out that first link, you can get a list of everything we have up so far, and that includes the slides that people are putting up and the links to anything that's published in YouTube, or you can go right to that YouTube playlist and see all the videos we have up. They are coming out slowly but surely. So I'll have more videos up. My goal is to be done with them by the end of next week. So there should be more videos and all of the content from DevCon. Other things we have going on. So we have a few meetups happening. We have a meetup on March 1st in London. Mintel is going to be hosting that at their office. You can go to our meetup page. You can see the link there. We also are a guest at a microservices meetup in London on March 7th. Both of those are in London. We are working on some other meetup locations throughout Europe and the US right now. If you're interested to host a meetup at your office or at a pub in your city, reach out to Francesco or I. We are working on our plan to support those meetups. We can help with content, we can help with swag, we can help with budget. So reach out to us if you're interested in hosting. We have some more events coming up as well. We always do our Tech Talk Live and Office Hours on a monthly basis. We went on hiatus over December for the holiday and then January for DevCon. So we haven't hosted them in a couple months, but we are back on track now. Our next Tech Talk Live will be March 14th, and then next Office Hours will be March 29th. We would love to have you guys be a part of these events as well. So if you have something you'd like to demo for the group, if you want to discuss something, reach out again to Francesco or I, and we can get you scheduled in the events. We always have lots to talk about, but we love to hear from the community as well, and it's nice to have some guests.
And Hel was saying we should. He was saying we should have a meetup and make a casserole to take over to Francesco's house to celebrate his new baby.
He probably does need to be on some sort of food train for the next couple weeks, people to help. And a meetup in Florence would be very cool. If there's enough folks in that area, just reach out and let us know. The other thing we're kind of toying around with right now is the idea of doing a spring hackathon. So we always do our global hackathon in September. And last year we had about 60 people participate in 20-some projects, and we'd love to do that again in the spring. I know that it gets a little bit crazy with holidays, but if you're interested in participating in a hackathon, I'm going to post something in the community, and you guys can chime in there and let us know if that's something you'd like to participate in. If you have some projects you're interested to work on, we thought maybe it would be cool to do something with working with ADF, since we've had so much content going on there from DevCon, and reaching out to that team. But if there's something additional you'd like to work on, if there's something specific you'd like to see worked on, reach out and let us know. We'll start seeing what kind of dates and planning we can put together. So that is the latest announcements. You can always find myself or Francesco in the community. It's community.alfresco.com. We post all of our events there. There's tons and tons and tons of new content since we had one of the office hours. So check out the blogs and the spaces divided by content, process, ADF, or the digital business platform. Lots of content there. And if you have questions, you can find us. Additionally, if you have questions during this session, you can post them in the IRC chat or you can post them on the YouTube chat. I am going to be monitoring both of those while Richard is doing his presentation about, or just talking about Alfresco 6. So if you have questions, just post them in the chat and I'll relay them to Richard. So with that, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you. I should say that for people who are watching this recording, we do our live interactions using chat. It's chat.alfresco.com. You can find there's usually 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 people in that room all the time. And so even when you're watching the recording, feel free to join chat.alfresco.com and participate in the conversation. And of course, you can join in new events. We try to do community office hours once a month. And we do our Tech Talk Live once a month as well. What's the regular schedule now for Tech Talk Live, Kristen?
We do Tech Talk Live the second Wednesday of every month. And we do office hours the last Friday. So we try to make it where it's like every 2 weeks there's an event. Occasionally, we have not been fantastic about keeping those dates, particularly to the second Wednesday, just because we're working around everybody else's schedule as well. So sometimes it's the first Wednesday or the third Wednesday. We try to give people a decent warning. But right now, we are scheduled second Wednesday, last Friday.
Excellent. Nice to have that reminder. At DevCon in Lisbon, we had a fantastic time. It was lots of fun. We had around, we had 250 people show up, Kristen? What was the end total?
About 275.
And we were planning on 250, so that's good news.
Yeah, it was a full house.
It was packed. It was lots of fun. The weather was beautiful. We appreciate our Portuguese friends arranging beautiful weather. We had a social event afterwards and wandered around the old part of Lisbon. Lots of fun. I should mention those who haven't attended an Alfresco technical event that it's a great place to find Alfresco related work. In the IRC channel, people are talking about some members of our community who switched jobs based on conversations they had at DevCon. So congratulations to them. And that means that there's vacancies. So at our next technical event, those people need to get replaced. So do definitely look at participating in DevCon to have those conversations. Part of the conversation we had at DevCon was around the roadmap for the product over the next few months, really the next year and a half. And office hours usually is intended to be a conversation. I did an internal discussion of our roadmap yesterday, so I decided I'd share those slides with this group as well. So please forgive me. It's only a couple of slides, and we'll try to keep it pretty conversational. Hopefully you're seeing my my Google presentations. Is that showing up, Kristen?
It's a little bit of a delay. I'm watching on the YouTube channel. So hang on. I see it when I see it. There we go. Yep, we're good. Excellent.
So I should bring up, this is the page Kristen has spent dozens of hours working on. This is our DevCon 2018 presentations list. And you can see she's got videos up for most of the presentations at DevCon. I believe she did a lot. She had a bump audio on a number of them and various other cleanup, but they're looking pretty good. I was going through them yesterday. There was one presentation up here in the keynote. Thomas DeMeo gave a product direction conversation, and Brian Remington gave an architectural evolution conversation. And those are really the official place to get a roadmap for Alfresco. That's where we prepared as a team and had a consistent understanding of what we were going to share. That's not this conversation. This conversation's informal. Specifically, if anybody says, Richard, you promised X, I'm going to delete the recording and say I never said anything. So, that's a bit of a joke, but don't make important decisions based on this conversation. Make sure you talk to our sales and support teams. This is not a contract, yada, 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 all that sort of thing. So, Boris is asking if you have a more efficient way of getting videos ready for next DevCon. The only time the videos went smoothly is when we paid somebody to come in and do them all. So I'm sure, I expect that'll be part of your budget next time, huh, Kristen? Are you on mute, Kristen?
Sorry, Richard. I was tracking down a link for somebody looking for a link to the community. Say that again.
Boris was asking if there's a more efficient way of getting the videos ready for DevCon, for the next
pay
DevCon.
Somebody else. Yes. Yes, pay a company to record them and edit them and post them. Honestly, no, it hasn't been that big a deal. It has just been every video requires a little bit of editing, and then I work from home, and my internet is just, it's a struggle to get videos up in a timely manner. So every video uploaded to YouTube from my computer takes about an hour and a half, 2 hours for each one to upload. So even if I could do them all in a day, I couldn't upload them all in a week. So we will have better, that is a lesson learned from this DevCon. We will have a better plan on getting videos out faster for next year.
It's funny that every time the budget comes up, having lived through this pain, I always say, I don't think that's enough money for the video stuff. Does it count the editing afterwards? And the marketing team says, oh, it'll be fine. And then somebody does the pain, and then we go through it again next year with a new group of people. So hopefully it gets easier. I do have to thank your family, Kristen, for going without Netflix for 3 weeks while you uploaded all these videos.
My internet is just crushed. Yep, there's nothing you can do. Absolutely.
Okay, excellent. So that's the answer to your question, Boris. The DevCon videos are great, and we look forward to your feedback on the different videos and conversation on them. So this is continuing that conversation. I want to go into a bit more, give an update on where we are 2 months later, 6 weeks later, and give a bit more detail than we went into during that keynote. So I work with 2 engineering teams. The first engineering team is our digital business platform services team. And our goal is to look at our various products, content and process, including governance and search and our developer framework user interfaces, and build the common services that are necessary to make a consistent experience across those products. So at some point, we're going to have a digital business platform 1.0 release that's going to contain some set of features that makes that common experience really appealing. And those features will be pulled into the various content and process, but they'll be shared when you have both instead of you having to run multiple identity servers, for instance. And we haven't figured out that timeline yet. We're just ticking off feature by feature. And this is largely what Brian covered in his Stepping Stones Digital Business Platform Evolution conversation at DevCon. So immediately, we're working on the containerized deployment, and that's gone fairly well. The digital business platform teams mostly finished with that, and we're moved on to single sign-on, to the ability to have an authentication token that authenticates against both process and content. To do that single sign-on, we're using an open source library called Keycloak. It's a Red Hat product, and that supports a variety of authentication mechanisms. And then once you've authenticated with Keycloak, you can use that authentication against all the backend services. Once we complete that, we're looking to have that. We want to make a lot of progress on that over the next couple of months. We're actively engaged on that project now, and then it'll get integrated into the content repository and into process services. Once we finish that, we're working on an API gateway, and that API gateway, the expectation is that you'll be able to manage all your API endpoints against a single place, and it can have some caching. And over time, we want to add features like analytics and logging and additional security on that API gateway. We've been thinking about what the open source strategy should be for these common services. A lot of these things are part of the core product, part of the core repository, and will continue to be open source, like our deployment system. Much of our single sign-on authentication will be part of the open source product. We're thinking that API gateway really is a separate product that is most useful in larger environments where you're trying to operate at scale. And so our current expectation is that's probably going to be proprietary, but we're still figuring these things out. Of course, your feedback's always useful, but but I just want to be really clear that some of this stuff we're trying to figure out where to draw the line between our commercialization strategy and our community building broad adoption strategy. That's the goal for 2018. There's additional work that's being done towards a unified digital business platform by other teams. We're working on a new administration console so that there aren't different systems in content and process to do administration. And currently we have stuff in Share, we have stuff in the admin console of the repository and in process services. We want to bring all that together into a new, probably an Angular-based admin application. That's going to be another team working on that. We're also improving our modeling. We want to have consistent modeling and forms generation between content and process. And that's also going to be another team. And that's another area where we're trying to figure out which of those tools are really core and which of those are really meant for these larger use cases. So that's the goal for this year. We expect to see a lot of that. Some of these things, the containerized deployment will be in ACS 6.0. SSO, we hope to see before the end of the year in the content repository. And we also expect to see process services 1.9. They're expecting in the next few months. That'll have the containerized deployment. And then SSO, hopefully in content services 2.0 later in the year. Of course, timelines change, and especially when I'm talking about other teams, so I'm not as intimately familiar with their timelines. But that's what we're looking at for 2018. In 2019, probably the end of 2018, we want to be finishing with our initial cut of the API gateway and moving on to identity. And what we mean by that is taking the LDAP synchronization from process and content and unifying that, and then having that person identity and group membership manage that central authentication layer and be able to leverage that from content and process. So that's that next big piece. That's a fairly large change to the way the content repository works. So it won't show up in the content repository till our next incompatible release, a 7.0, when people are expecting larger changes. And then early next year, next calendar year, the goal is to start that eventing service. We've talked about this for a very long time, but being able to make API calls that end up in a queue, be able to batch them, provide some sort of transactionality, be able to subscribe to specific events you're interested in, and manage those for audit or to trigger an external process. We recognize that's key to being able to move from an in-process customization to an API-based customization. And we've talked about this for a year now, and a lot of people panic. You're going to cut off our in-process customizations? And the answer, but there's no replacement. And the answer is, well, not yet. We're building that replacement. It's just taking a while. So that's platform services. I lost track, Kristen, of the conversation in chat. Were there any questions on this topic before I move on? I think you're on mute, Kristen.
I am every time. We've had a couple questions posted. I sent them to you in Skype, but I don't think it's not particular. One is about versioning of documents. The other is about a NoSQL database to store metadata. So it's not exactly, I think people were just posting some things that we can get to at the end.
Okay. Sounds good. And I do know some of these conversations, some of the questions feed into the next topic, which is Content Services 6.0. I think my slides are still sharing. Looks like they were a little blurry, but now they're better. Somebody put their glasses on, I guess. So there are two goals for Content Services 6.0. The first is we recognize this is a backwards incompatible release. It's our opportunity to make changes that are more disruptive than in a 6.1 or 6.2. And our first goal is to replace the deployment system. We recognize our existing installers. There was a while when we said the GUI installers are only meant for demos, for proof of concept evaluation. Then we really tried to harden them and make them more production worthy. And so we started to tell people, use it for production. So we have a consistent environment we're supporting. But we couldn't quite make that technology manage things. There's some intricacies around security, keeping the LibreOffice user isolated from the Alfresco user, and the way the Java system interacts with other areas that the installer didn't manage well. And so we started looking at other technologies, and lo and behold, the industry's moving this direction. There's containerized infrastructure like Docker that's fairly advanced, and we realize it's leading edge, but it has started to be adopted in production by many of our customers. They're asking us to move this direction. And so we're jumping in, we're going to do it. And so we're going to have a containerized reference deployment. It's not expected to be the only way to deploy Alfresco. It's expected to be the reference, an example of best practices. And we'll test it, we'll support it. It's intended for production use. But we also recognize that our customers are going to modify it for their environments, or maybe they don't like Docker at all, and they'll use the manual deployment that we've had forever, the distribution.zip, and they'll pick those pieces apart and put them into their environment. So that is our first thing. It's taken a longer to get this available for public consumption than we expected. Currently, it did not make the February release of Community Edition. We expect to have it ready in the March release of Community Edition for the open source product. I'll go through the releases in a moment, the timeline. But that's the containerized deployment. The next topic we're working on is library upgrades. There are a number of library upgrades that we were unable to do in 5.2 because they're more disruptive. They cause breaking changes. In the February release of Community Edition is our first one of those. These are the release notes for the February release. I should clarify, I approved the release of the February Community Edition early access yesterday evening. It was online for about 12 hours. Then we recognized there was a problem with the binaries, so we took it back offline. The fixed binaries should be up in the next 30 minutes or so. So if you downloaded in the last 12 hours, you should delete those and use a new one. It's not going to break anything, but it didn't match the code tags, so people weren't getting exactly what they thought they were getting. And it was missing a couple features we wanted. So in the February release, this is our second early access of Content Repository 6.0. The first one was really about using our new build tooling with Git capability as we moved from Subversion to Git. It was last November. We went longer than we intended. But last November's release really used all of our new tooling, and that was a bit rocky, but we got it done. This release is starting to roll out some of those library upgrades, and there's also some API, some new APIs, the action service. So the first of these upgrades is the Jackson library. That requires changes to customizations that parse JSON. And so if you're doing a customization that parses JSON, you'll need to reference the Jackson 2. Jackson 1 had some known security vulnerabilities. They were low impact, but we fear it was time to upgrade anyway. Similarly, we've upgraded some of the other libraries. Those don't have as big an impact on customizations. I should also mention while I'm looking at these release notes with you that we do have our Community Edition 6.0 page where we try to roll together all the new features in each Community Edition release. So we mentioned the code organization, we mentioned the new heartbeat tracking we're adding to Community Edition. One of the really nice new benefits to 6.0 is that we've moved JOD Converter into our open source product into Community Edition. It used to be that the way Community Edition dealt with LibreOffice was not as reliable as the way the commercial product did, but we've moved that more reliable integration in. And we've also released audit and avatar REST endpoints since in the last November's release. So it's always nice to monitor that. So the plan for the next release is we're working on the spring update. We're currently on Spring 3, which is not supported by the Spring project anymore. It's not receiving security updates, and that's a risk for us. Spring 4 is supported and would be a fairly clean upgrade. It would impact some customizations, but we want to go all the way to Spring 5. That has a bigger impact, but specifically the way that it accepts configuration through the environment plays nicer in a containerized deployment. I forgot to mention that one of the goals of our containerized deployment is to live nicer in a 12-factor app. If you haven't looked up 12-factor app, it's the hotness in DevOps. Working well in a containerized application, having immutable containers, and being able to manage configuration through the environment and spit out logging in a standard way. We're trying to move that direction. And part of that is moving to Spring 5. Our expectation is to get that work done before the next, before the March release. We'll see how actually the engineering actually proceeds. And if we can't get to 5 in a way that's acceptable for our customers, we want to be careful about how much disruption we do. Should we, if we can't get all the way to 5, then we'll settle for 4. The next major library upgrade we're doing is the Hazelcast. Hazelcast is used for clustering, and the current version of Hazelcast we use is fairly old. Hazelcast is often tuned for individual environments, and so we recognize that it's complicated to us upgrading Hazelcast impacts people who've done that tuning and has things working well. So that's one of the backwards incompatible changes we're making in 6.0. But the new Hazelcast has a lot of improvements to stability and performance and the tuning process. So we think it's an important change. It's widely requested by our customers. So that's the other major library upgrade we have.
Hey, Richard. Well, we did have one question. Someone had asked in the YouTube chat, what did you mean exactly by backwards incompatible release when you talked about the installer? They were asking, aren't all releases are backwards incompatible?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So we have 3 different types of releases that we do, trying to play nicely. The first is, sorry, taking off screen share so you can actually see me while I'm gesticulating. So we have our service packs, and we're trying to be very careful that the only thing that goes into a service pack for our commercial supported products for content services is things that will not affect the user interface and things that are very safe, that are don't require major programming, any programming changes. Then we have releases like 5152, 505152, where they live within this family, and we try to preserve backwards incompatibility. There might be minor changes that have to happen, but we try to make sure we don't do highly disruptive changes in those releases. We don't break API compatibility. So we have our version V1 REST API, which is used for integrating externally with the content repository. But we also have our unversioned V0 APIs, where in the documentation, there's a section where it says extension points. And all those extension points, we try to protect for people that are integrating within the application, within the repository process. And we try very hard not to break that compatibility during an upgrade within a version family. But when you move from 5.2 to 6.0, it gives the opportunity to say, look, all bets are off. You'll need to do a bit of additional testing, and we will change some of these configuration properties. We will change some of these API endpoints, some of these extension points. And we recognize things like the installation deployment system. We've made minor changes in the past in a 5.1, 5.2 sort of time frame, but saying everything based on the current installers, that's going to go away, and you should look at the new containerized deployment or automate around the manual distribution zips. We recognize that's much more disruptive, and so that's why that's what we mean by backwards incompatible. Is we recognize we're making some larger disruptions in this release. So, is there follow-up questions on that? Feel free to stick it into chat. And thank you, Kristen, for interrupting about that. I see now there's another question about the SDK.
Yes.
I have to apologize that we've been so focused on the changes and the library upgrades, we haven't kept the SDK up to date with where the code's been going. We have made a pull request against the SDK that tells it to pull from the new code locations, but that hasn't been merged into the main SDK. So the current SDK available on GitHub, I should pause, the Alfresco Content Repository Software Development Kit, that SDK, is used, it provides examples of how to do these in-process customizations. It uses Maven to set up a development environment, and it shows how to do unit testing, it shows how to do integration testing, and it shows basic customizations like a web script and action. It also has examples for share customization. So that's what we're talking about. It lives on GitHub. It's been a community-led project for quite a while. And when we changed the code locations to use our new Git repository and move to 6.0, we did create a pull request against the SDK to get it to use that new code location. Unfortunately, moving the SDK between Alfresco versions when you're working on a project has always been challenging. And Oli, the project manager who pays attention to the SDK, he really wanted us to simplify that process as part of the 6.0 release. It doesn't look like we're going to get that done. So he and I were talking yesterday about what do we do. At this point in time, you can pull from the branch, and that SDK will work against 6.0. But until we do the next release, the SDK isn't going to, the default SDK will not pull the 6.0 code. We want to have that pull request merged in the March release of Community Edition, but it's not a guarantee yet. It's not on the schedule. We're trying to get it on the schedule, and it sounds like it's going to be some. I was asking Oli if his wife is going to spend a Saturday out of the house or something, so he can be bored and actually do the work. That might be the most efficient way to get this done, but we recognize that Oli's evenings and weekends is not the right strategy for the SDK long term. So we're looking at how to turn that into a more reliable part of the product in the future, or how to evolve it. Maybe we need to move away from Maven SDKs, especially as we're moving towards REST APIs and more external integrations. That SDK does seem a bit anachronistic. We recognize it's important for 6.0, but there's some questions about if there's a better way to help new developers get up to speed with Alfresco than that current SDK. And again, that's an area we'd appreciate your feedback. So there was something about, yeah, so the snapshot SDK that's pulled from the pull request. I don't know the version numbers, but I do know there's a pull request that has the links to the 6.0 Maven, 6.0 code locations and the Maven stuff for 6.0. And I think there was one other question. Oh, yeah, that was the backwards compatible one. So excellent. Thank you, Kristen. So the other big change for 6.0 doesn't impact you as users on the same level, but we are adding an improved heartbeat service. Our commercial product has had a heartbeat for a very long time, which reports back usage so that we can pay attention to version adoption and scalability requirements and get a sense for that. But those reports haven't been as useful as it was time for an update. They've been useful, but we have grand aspirations. The open source product has also pulled an image from our website that has helped us to understand some basic ideas about usage, but it's not much detail. I'm going to go on mute and cough. Sorry. Where's the mute button? Okay, thank you. So we're replacing that image that can pull from our website with the heartbeat service. So we have the same heartbeat being reported from our open source products and our commercial products. That will help us to better understand actual usage in the wild, and it's going to help me measure return on investment. So I can say to our engineering team and our management, look, when we pay X amount for our open source to distribute our open source products, it's benefiting us in the following way. I think that's really going to help us in increasing our investment level with our open source products. We've been doing a lot, but we can always do more. So that's the goal for that new heartbeat service. The way we're currently thinking about it is the community edition, the open source products, our intention is to make sure that's anonymized, to not collect identifying information, including IP addresses from our open source products. Obviously, the IP addresses come in when the report happens, but we separate the IP addresses from the data, and we only consume the data. Whereas our proprietary products, where we have a commercial relationship with these people, we're gonna match that information to the individuals so we can be proactive in assisting them. So that's our expectation. So 6.0 is a fairly limited release. We're calling it a 6.0 because there are some changes that are going to impact customizations and make upgrades. In some environments, upgrades are, people got to be careful about upgrades to make sure it goes smoothly. But we're not, we're trickling out new features. It's not all at once in a giant release. So our march towards this release is we got the February release out any minute now, yesterday, today, depending on how you count. The March release will have the new deployment and the new heartbeat service will be enabled. We're still going to call that early access. We expect some of the library upgrades to be done, but maybe not all of them. We want our engineering code freeze to be early April. So that's the goal we're shooting for. So all these library upgrades are expected to be done by then. We got about 6 weeks, 5 weeks. And then we have shortly after that code freeze is when we'll do the first early access release of our commercial product. We'll create a Jive site, and people will be able to use that space in Jive is where is the platform we use for our developer community at community.alfresco.com. We'll create a space in there for this early access program, and people can join that space. The current expectation is they'll have to request access to the early access images, the Docker containers for our proprietary products, but we'll grant that, and then they can play with things, give feedback. But it's roughly the same deployment process as our open source products. And then we'll pull the April release will look a lot like that early access, and then hopefully that'll be a GA. We'll see how things go, but it'd be nice if that's our first GA and we can get broad usage of that. If not, we'll do a May release that's a GA, and then we usually wait a little bit after that GA community release to get additional feedback from real world usage, and then we'll be able to make things publicly available to our customers and partners for content services.
And Richard, that EA program, that's not invite only, that's open to anybody who wants to participate and check things out, right?
Yeah, correct. So we expect to have that site be public because you can play with Community Edition and give feedback on that deployment service. You don't need any sort of special permission there. But to get access to the commercial images, you'll have to request that, and we'll give it to you because we want to make sure we have those are our customers, and you have to have a license to use those commercial images. And we want to make sure that we pay attention to who those people are so that we can get them on supported product afterwards, so they don't accidentally put the EA into production and ask us to fix it. So the current plan is for that to be a public site so the conversations can be in the open, even though we will control access to the commercial product. So thanks for the clarification, Kristen. Any other questions on, so Angel asked questions about the library upgrades, so that's why I spent a bit additional time there. One of Angel's points was that the library upgrade would be, he asked, is that important for moving to the cloud? And that is one of the key reasons. Moving from Spring 4 to Spring 3 to Spring 5, Spring 5 plays much nicer in a cloud environment like Amazon or even Cloud Foundry. And the way it handles environment variables, the way it handles customization, configuration, plays much nicer in a container environment. So that is the driver behind that. Eunice is asking about Docker images provided by Alfresco will be Linux-based. The initial reference deployment is Linux-based. We recognize that we have some customers who prefer a Windows environment. We should recognize there's two ways to run a Docker container in Windows. You can run Linux in Windows, and it just virtualizes using the embedded Hyper-V virtualization engine, or you can run a containerized Windows on a Windows host. The Linux images run on Windows today. That process works. We've tested it. It's fine. But we do recognize that there is a demand for us to provide a Windows container to run on Windows, where customers would bring their own Windows license, but be able to live in that Windows ecosystem. Specifically, we have some customers who get really nervous about share-alike licenses like the GPL that Linux is licensed under. So we recognize that demand. We intend to do that. We don't yet have the timeline for that. So Eunice says, exactly, so he understands what I'm talking about. Feel free to ask follow-up questions if you have. There was another, the other question was out of workflow sort of moment. So, okay, let's talk about the next couple releases. This is where the plans get a bit vaguer because we're talking about future. This isn't what we're in the middle of. But we would like to push out a 6.1 this year still. We want to get a 6.0 out of the content repository in the next couple of months, but we do want to get a more limited release before the end of the year. Specifically, I issued a blog post in September about the CIFS shared network drive interface and how Windows is deprecating that. There's some security vulnerabilities. We want people to move to WebDAV. And we've identified a set of improvements we'd like to make to that. It got put a bit on the backlog as we've been focused on containerization, but we still want to get those protocol improvements in people's hands as soon as possible. So we're going to get that done before the end of the year. Also, as I mentioned earlier, we want to be able to bring in the SSO service and the API gateway for content services. And we want to track some additional heartbeat items like how many custom workflows do people have, things like that that'll help us decide about the future evolution of our product. So that's that 6.1. What actually goes in is we want to keep fairly flexible because we're going to push out the web dev protocol improvements, even if that's the only thing in that release. So again, you can see this as a more limited sort of release, but that's the plan there. Then at some point in 2019, in the first half of 2019, we want to do a 7.0. And at this point, we recognize it's going to be another larger release, specifically to get that identity service in. The identity service will require people to change the way they do LDAP synchronization. And so it's a bigger deal. We also want to externalize the workflow service. Currently, our open source workflow engine activity is embedded in the content repository. And there's just a lot of maintenance challenges to that. And if somebody decides that they need to move from a more limited workflow to a full-blown process engine, it's a pain. They have to rewrite all their workflows. So our goal is to move that towards an external workflow service. And we recognize that will require a lot of workflow rewriting to leverage the REST APIs. And we also recognize our REST APIs have to be more robust in order to do that. So that's why we're pushing that into that next release. Morgan mentioned that having a 7.0 only a year after a 6.0 seems too short. And that is the challenge. We're trying to increase our pace of innovation and roll out new stuff, especially the digital business platform integration stuff quicker. And that requires more backwards and compatible changes or larger releases, larger upgrades. We're going to try and make that as smooth as possible. Again, all these dates are very informal. We're figuring these things out. But that's part of this conversation is to say, yeah, that is our intention. And we do recognize that's shorter than what we've done in the past. It's also shorter to have 6 months between releases, between a 6.0 and a 6.1. And we have to wonder how will that impact our support model? How will that impact our customers? How many of our customers will decide to skip a release and wait for the next one? These are all questions we need to answer. So that's why these are tentative plans. But the point of office hours is for me to share our tentative plans to get your feedback. So let me know what you think, Morgan. So that was the conversation about that external workflow service. Is we do recognize that's a larger change. It's going to be more disruptive to people, but it does long term. It provides much better tooling. We'll be able to. The expectation is we'll be able to leverage some of the workflow design tools of activity and process services in the content repository, and upgrading to a full-blown process engine gets much easier. So that's the goal there. Then the third item I already mentioned is that event service, to be able to subscribe to events, audit events, and be able to manage REST APIs, be able to put them together into more of a transaction view. We recognize that's important for that workflow service. If it takes changing the timeline to get all that work done, we definitely consider that. We're kind of nervous about trying to get the external workflow service out without the advanced REST APIs that come with eventing. Pause for a minute for feedback. So that's the roadmap we want to cover. That's about 18 months of roadmap. The main questions I've received on this is about that workflow service. We published a blog post in January about these architectural changes. And the main feedback I've gotten on this is you can see Axel engaged and asked some of these questions, but I've received it from a lot of places, but I like the way Axel phrased these questions. The two pieces of feedback I've gotten is, whoa, that's a lot of changes in that blog post. You're getting rid of a bunch of stuff. You're talking about everybody doing REST APIs and these larger changes. Are you really going to do all this in the next 90 days with the 6th release? The answer is no. We're trying to let people know about changes that are going to occur over the next couple of years. And we're going to get them done as we can, but we want to set out a vision so that people can plan accordingly. And that's why we have this table of actions that you can take immediately, actions that'll come with the 6.0 release, and actions that'll come in the future, so that people recognize that not everything's happening immediately and has an idea for what actions they can take. We also have these guidelines around prefer the REST APIs. They don't cover every use case today, but they are preferable to changing within the content repository process itself. Even though a workflow's in the embedded activity today, the more that you recognize, the more that you can leverage even a local REST API call. I know it's awkward. It's a bit strange to do that, but that will save you that effort of changing that to an external call when it moves to an external service in the next year or two, whenever we get that work done. And we're also drawing a distinction between workflow in the content repository, where you're integrating content, or where you're manipulating content within the confines of the content repository, and a larger process where we expect people to use the process services application, which we do have a separate license for. That process services is meant for integrating and publishing. So if your workflow is integrating with an external system, then you really should consider whether that is better done in an external engine anyway, where you can use external activity today or the external process services today. And of course, it'll make that upgrade easier in the future, but it's also the way our licensing works to say process services is for integrating through workflow in an external system. You can integrate with the content repository today using a variety of APIs and methods to publish to the web, to pull from external services using CMIS or shared network drives or whatever. But if you're doing it within a workflow, that's when we start thinking that's what we have another product tailored for that to make that easier. And then the other piece of guidance is that if you're customizing share, it's time to think the ADF is fairly mature at this point. There is an example content application. Is that a quicker way to meet your goals in a way that will require less long-term maintenance? We still support share. We still support customizing share. We still document how to customize share. But over the long term, we expect that to decrease and people to be using the ADF to do that. So, and that's largely what the guidance was in here from these questions. Feel free to read the full conversation and post your own questions. I'll continue monitoring that and answering. So that's that workflow service. The last item that I received some questions about is our open source strategy. I mentioned this at DevCon and would be very interested to know further opinions on what we discussed. But the content repository traditionally has taken a very different strategy than the activity process services side of our business, where we've always been proud that the content repository is a full-blown application, GUI and all, that can be used by a non-technical user, completely open. And the way we've built our business is that when you get to a certain size of scalability and you need clustering or encrypted content storage or advanced user management, that's when you would buy our commercial product. But we recognized with the workflow engine, that started out as, hey, broad usage and a more traditional open core model where the engine is open and it's really available for developers, but to get the user-focused tooling and the GUIs and a lot of these, a lot of the productization pieces, that's when you would buy our proprietary product. And as you put these two things together into a digital business platform, those different models start to cause friction. That, and as we move to a containerized world, separating purely on scalability doesn't seem as natural as it used to. So we haven't made any decisions, but one of those things we're looking at, as I mentioned earlier, is to say, should it be the content repository with its APIs, and is that the open core, and the GUI interfaces? Obviously, the ADF is already open source. You can build your own GUIs, but a lot of the administration consoles and user configuration GUIs and the API gateway that provides that sort of consistent layer application for a larger enterprise, if these are the right places to keep things proprietary. Once we have a more formal policy, we'll end up publishing it formally and explaining how we evolved from our existing policy that we're still following in 6.0 to whatever the future holds. but I am very interested in getting your feedback on how that would work and how much it would impact your business. Is if you're a community edition integrator, do you really care about the user interfaces, or are you mostly building your own? So, and user interfaces, that sounds overly broad and probably overly scary. We're really talking about specific interfaces, the solution specific, vertical specific interfaces, or specific admin tools. Things like the forms modeler or model management. There's currently model management in Share. It's got some deficiencies. We want to improve that with the feedback we received. That's one of those areas where we wonder if that piece should be proprietary, because experts like you would be doing in XML anyway, and we're really trying to make it available to the business user as part of that large enterprise proprietary product. So yes, please have that conversation with me. I see Boris asking, with all the new non-backwards compatible releases, how difficult will it be for a partner to keep using Share on its own cost? So I want to make clear that Share is supported and it's staying around. Boris says, I know it wouldn't be supported, but would it be possible at all? It is supported, and we are going to continue Share progressing. In fact, managing Share through these upgrades should actually get easier as the pace of development is slowed, so there'll be fewer changes that can break your customizations. We recognize eventually it'll get sunsetted, but that day is not today. You'll see with the 6.0, we decided to call it 6.0 instead of 5.3 because we made some changes to libraries and to the deployment system. But we didn't break the APIs as far as we're aware. The extension points, the REST APIs, none of that has changed. And so one of the points is we want to communicate clearly with a major release like a 6.0 and a 7.0. But in some ways, we think upgrades should be cheaper than they were in the past. That's one of the reasons why we feel comfortable doing it quicker, because if you're building on the REST APIs, we're not breaking those. And as you move towards containerized deployment, it becomes easier to evolve that. And Share development is slowed, so that's not changing as fast. And the ADF has its own versioning scheme. So each of these reasons means we should be able to move faster without impacting people as much. That's the expectation. Of course, we need your feedback on that. Looking through, I think I'm caught up on questions. That was a list of questions people asked me in advance of this session. I feel bad monologuing so much, so
we did have one question, Richard, from the YouTube chat. If you'll look at your Skype,
That's a great one. When have you considered using a NoSQL DB to store metadata? The answer to that is yes. We have considered it. Oh, there's another one. Yeah, in introduction to NoSQL. We did a proof of concept on this. Two engineers spent a month or so looking at how a NoSQL DB would be used. We recognize the nodes table in the database gets fairly large, and the audit table in the database gets very large. And we're looking at offloading these to a NoSQL database. How useful would that be? And our conclusion was offloading audits gains a lot of benefits, but moving to the new event system provides those same benefits in a way that's easier to consume for an external application. Once we made that determination, we decided that eventually we'd probably like to move the node properties table to NoSQL, but in the short term, it doesn't gain us as much as we thought it would. So we did the research. That's what we concluded. It's probably something we will consider again, but only after we've completed things like that event service, the new modeling, some of these other things we've talked about. We consider higher priorities right now. I see people are asking, don't use MongoDB for the NoSQL part. Boris says it's better to use databases that include JSON support only for those parts that need unstructured data. Yeah, and that was the idea there, is that if we took a different approach, we were looking at Cassandra and Mongo. We tried both, as well as some of the Amazon services. Postgres, of course, Tycho points out, has JSON support. And we were looking, that's one of the nice things about the node service is moving the node table, is that that's an area where in the audit logs is very unstructured. The node area would allow more flexibility in changing the content model over time. Yeah, Alf node properties is what I meant to say. So in general, yeah, it's an interesting area. It probably would have some benefits, but it doesn't have we didn't recognize the benefits being as high as what we're currently targeting. So we lowered it on the backlog. We'll investigate it again. The other thing that came out of that investigation is that there's a limit to what kind of changes we can make in the current architecture of the content repository. Moving towards service-oriented architecture, pulling out the identity service, pulling out the event service and the audit service, that helps a lot in reducing the footprint of the content repository so we can change it in more fundamental ways. But we've also wondered, maybe we need a new thing that meets a slightly different use case in the content repository, that has a more flexible content model and doesn't have the same set of restrictions or guarantees as the current content repository. We're calling it the no ECM repository. Similarly to NoSQL, a relational database provides a lot of guarantees, but that comes with a certain set of restrictions. An ECM content repository like we have today provides a lot of guarantees, but it comes with some restrictions, especially when you're modeling. And maybe we should relax those restrictions for certain loads. It would give a flexibility that you don't have today and a scalability you don't have today, and it would give you that NoSQL feel. We're wondering if that's a separate product we should build alongside the current product, or if it's an evolution of the current product. And so this is a bit of internal stuff. That's our next proof of concept, is to figure out what would that look like. It'd probably use a lot of lambdas or function-oriented architecture. It would probably use a NoSQL store. Those are some of the criteria we've been looking at. So that's what we're doing our next proof of concept. If it's appealing and it looks like it provides good customer value, we'll work on it. Or if it turns out like the NoSQL investigation we did recently, and we say, yeah, that was useful, but we should let this sit a little longer, then that's what we'll end up doing. We really do pay a lot of attention to your feedback and what's going to provide you value. So excellent conversation items. I love that. So it looks like we've got 3 minutes. That's time for one more question, probably.
Let's see, I've got one more. One more from YouTube. It says, we're suffering to propose Alfresco to model really large repository, billions of documents, due to limitations to use the ER model for metadata modeling. This is the same this is from the same person that was looking at the NoSQL.
Yeah, there's different aspects to trying to scale Alfresco to really high scalability requirements, billions or tens of billions of documents. Or content items, as the case may be. And obviously there's raw scalability. We've really improved at that. We have our benchmarking framework that helps you to prove that the repository will manage the load requirements you have. But then to this point, there's a question about how rigid of a content model can you have when you have 10 billion items? How much will that content model evolve over time? And currently our repository provides very strong guarantees about how that content model will work. If you have a type, you can't delete that type. You can't remove data from that type, except programmatically to migrate everything to the new type. If you're using aspects, you do get a level of flexibility that you don't get with types. You can add and remove aspects on the fly and evolve your content model over time that way. But it can be unwieldy if you have hundreds of aspects or very large content models. We do have customers who do that today. We have one specific customer who runs an OEM SaaS service on Alfresco. They've got a few thousand customers, each with their own content model. And they manage thousands of, a few thousand content models, one for each customer in this scenario. It's awkward. We recognize that. That's part of what we're thinking about, how to make it cleaner going in the future. If that's your need today, I think we have customers doing it today, but depending on the size of your content and what other features of the repository you're interested in, you might benefit more from a different sort of content store, like a NoSQL store. That's really up to your specifics. But you should recognize that when we talk about this proof of concept we did with NoSQL, and when we talk about the proof of concepts we're doing with a next generation, more flexible, more scalable database, it is this need we're looking to solve. But I have to admit, we don't have a solution in the current repository, and it's not on the 6.0 or 7.0 roadmaps. So you're probably 18 months away from us making further progress on that specific issue. When we looked at what are the pain points of our customers, that's that's still a smaller part of our customer base, and we need to grow that over time. So hopefully you found that to be a useful answer. I know it's a bit vague, but we can engage more. I always hang out in the, not always, I try to check in the developer community at community.alfresco.com. I try to check in there once a week or so. So if you ask questions there, I will try to weigh in. Obviously, you can email me. My inbox at the moment is caught up after DevCon, but that comes and goes. So I apologize if it takes me a while to respond. Of course, Kristen's always paying attention too, and she can elbow me anytime that I need to answer something. So I do love the conversation. I benefit a lot. It does feed directly into our roadmap. So please keep the conversation coming.
And you do sometimes, you are occasionally known to be in the IRC chat room as well.
Yes, I do keep IRC open, and then I catch up after I start. I'm in the US, but I work with a European team. So oftentimes people ask me questions and I'll respond a few hours later after my European team leaves for the day. But I do try to hang out there, and that's a great place. Chat.alfresco.com. We can continue these conversations.
Awesome. So we are out of time for today. If you do have questions, of course, you can post in the community. I keep an eye on it, and I can tag Richard if there's something he needs to get. If you are in London, we have a meetup on March 1st, just a reminder, or you can come to the microservices meetup on March 7th. So we would love to see you at either one of those events. And we'll keep you posted on any hackathon plans, and see you at the next Tech Talk Live. Would be March 14th is the next one. So second Wednesday is our plan. We'll hopefully talk to you guys and see you next time. Thanks, everybody.
If Francesco's all bloodshot at that Tech Talk Live, you'll know how his baby was doing.
His excuse to be tired for quite a while now. Right. So, thanks, guys. See you next time. Bye.